For years, she quietly cared for two boys left at her doorstep on a stormy night. The small town watched them grow as an unlikely but deeply united family. Everything seemed finally at peace, until, years later, a sophisticated stranger knocks on the door and says a phrase that changes everything. "You have no idea what you've done." Now, the answers she never dared to seek could reveal a past much larger than she imagined, and put at risk everything she has built. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is the Linda's Stories channel. I hope you enjoy this story. In the small town of Pine Hills, the autumn of 1963 brought with it chilly winds that foretold a harsh winter. The golden leaves lazily fell on the garden of the modest local chapel, where Juliet Carson, a 53-year-old woman, swept with the dedication of someone caring for a treasure. Her brown hair already showed grey strands, but her green eyes still held a hopeful sparkle, despite the marks of time and disappointments. Juliet knew every inch of that chapel, every wooden bench polished by her hands, every stained glass window that she meticulously cleaned until it sparkled, every corner that she kept immaculate. It was her refuge, her solace, after Harold, her husband of 20 years, left 5 years ago, tired of waiting for children that never came. "I need heirs, Julie. A man needs to leave his legacy," he said on the last night with his bags already packed. 3 months later, he married a woman 15 years younger, and in less than a year was cradling a baby in his arms. Juliet lived in the small house at the back of the chapel, given to her by Father Thomas, a kind man of 70 who saw in her not just a dedicated worker, but a genuinely good soul. As she cleaned the altar that Friday afternoon, Juliet looked at the crucifix above her. "Maybe it wasn't meant to be," she murmured to herself, as she often did during her silent conversations with God. But sometimes it still hurts so much. Nightfall came quickly, bringing with it a fierce storm. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and the rain lashed against the windows of the small house where Juliet curled up under a worn blanket, with a cup of tea in her hands. She tried to read a book, but her mind wandered. She imagined what it would be like to have children to tell bedtime stories to protect from the sound of thunder, to teach how to pray, small hands to hold hers, innocent smiles that would light up her days. "God," she whispered, closing her eyes, "I know I shouldn't ask for anything else. I have health, a roof over my head, food on the table. But this loneliness is eating me up inside. I just wish I knew what it's like to have a family." A sudden crash pulled her out of her prayer. It wasn't thunder, it was the sound of wood banging against wood. Juliet knew that sound, the sacristy window with the broken latch that Father Thomas still hadn't fixed. Sighing, she grabbed an old coat and a flashlight. She couldn't let the rain in and damage the sacred vestments. She went out the back, shielding herself from the storm as best as she could, and entered the chapel through the side door. As expected, the window was banging furiously, and a pool of water had already formed on the wooden floor. Juliet hurried to close it, tying it with a piece of rope she kept for emergencies like this. She dried the floor with old towels, checked for any other damages, and was about to return to her shelter when an unusual sound pierced through the roar of the storm. A moan, weak, almost imperceptible. "It must be the wind," she murmured, but something stirred in her heart. Again the sound, now more distinct. It wasn't the wind. It was a cry. Guided by an instinct she did not understand, Juliet walked to the chapel's main door. Her heart was pounding so hard that it seemed to want to leap out of her chest. With trembling hands she turned the doorknob and pulled the heavy oak door. The rain came in violently, wetting her face, but Juliet barely felt it. Her attention was entirely focused on the wicker basket at the top of the stairs, partially sheltered by the small porch. "My God," she whispered, kneeling down. In the basket, wrapped in faded blue blankets, were 2 babies, their little faces red from crying, their bodies trembling with cold. Identical twins, no more than 3 months old. On the edges of the blankets, embroidered in white thread, Juliet read the names: Damien and Dennis. Without a second thought, she picked up the basket and rushed into her house. With nimble fingers, she lit the wood stove, warmed some milk and improvised baby bottles with small bottles she kept. She changed the babies' damp clothes for clean, dry towels and rubbed their little bodies to warm them. "It's all right now," she whispered, as the boys, now fed and warmed, fell asleep in her arms. "You're safe." That night, Juliet did not sleep. She watched the two little angels in her lap, their chests rising and falling in peaceful breathing, their tiny fingers tightly holding her thumbs. Silent tears rolled down her face. "Thank you," she murmured repeatedly, looking at the sky through the window, where the storm was beginning to subside. The next morning, when Father Thomas arrived for the first Mass, he found Juliet in the chapel, the babies sleeping peacefully in their basket. "Juliet, what is this?" he asked, astonished. With tear-filled eyes, she recounted the nocturnal discovery. The priest listened attentively, his wrinkled face contracting in concern. "We need to inform Delegate Miller," he finally said. "This is a serious matter." Delegate Miller was a practical man, of few words, but with a just heart. He examined the babies, the basket, and noted the embroidered names. "I'll investigate," he promised, "but we don't have many resources at the station, and these days, with so many young women desperate—" He sighed. "The children need to stay somewhere in the meantime. The nearest orphanage is 100 miles away." "They can stay with me," Juliet quickly said, perhaps too quickly. She felt her face flush under the gaze of the two men. "I mean, I have experience with children. I was a teacher for many years, and the house is small but clean. I can take care of them until... Her voice faltered. Until someone took them away. Until she had to say goodbye. Father Thomas and Deputy Miller exchanged glances. "It's temporary," the sheriff warned, "just until we find something out." But weeks turned into months and no clue emerged about the mother's identity or the reason for the abandonment. The news spread throughout the small town, and soon the community mobilized around Juliet and the twins. Martha, the seamstress, made little clothes. John, the carpenter, built a sturdy crib that fit both babies. The retired teacher, Mrs. Wilkins, donated toys that had belonged to her children. On Sundays, after church, the town ladies brought homemade food, fresh milk, cloth diapers. "They are angels sent by God," said Mrs. Peterson, while rocking Dennis, "straight into the arms of those who most deserved them." Juliet smiled, grateful, but her heart feared the day she would have to give them up. At night, cradling the babies, she promised them in secret, "No matter what happens, I will never leave you. I will always find you." The months turned into years. Damien and Dennis grew up healthy and happy, running through the chapel's corridors, hiding among the wooden pews, helping Juliet with small tasks. They were identical physically, with brown hair and deep blue eyes, but had distinct personalities. Damien was the leader, always at the forefront in play, protective and daring. Denny was quieter, observant, with an infinite curiosity about the world. Both, however, shared an innate kindness and immense love for Juliet, whom they affectionately called Mama Julie. On the boy's 5th birthday, Juliet organised a small party in the chapel's garden. There was a homemade cake, fresh lemonade, and almost the entire town attended. The twins, wearing identical blue shirts that Juliet had sewn, blew out the candles together while everyone applauded. "Make a wish," Juliet whispered. "I don't need to," Damien replied, hugging her. "I already have everything I want." Dennis nodded, his eyes shining. "We're a family, right, Mama Julie?" Those words made Juliet's heart ache with happiness. A family. Yes, they were a family. On a Sunday morning, 2 weeks after the birthday, the Mass had ended, and the parishioners were chatting animatedly in the chapel's forecourt. Damien and Dennis were playing with other children, under Juliet's watchful eye, when a shiny and clearly expensive black car stopped in front of the chapel. A curious silence took over the crowd. Visitors were rare in Pine Hills, especially in cars like that. The door opened, and a tall, imposing man got out, dressed in an impeccable grey suit. He seemed to be about 60 years old, with grey hair slicked back and glasses with a gold frame. There was a dignity to his posture, but also something else, a tension, a deep weariness in his eyes. He looked around, located Father Thomas, and walked directly to him. They exchanged a few words in a low voice. The priest's face showed surprise, then concern. Finally, he nodded and called, "Juliet, could you come here for a moment, please?" With a lump in her throat, Juliet approached. There was something in the air, a sense that everything was about to change. "Juliet, this is Mr. Mason," said Father Thomas in a solemn voice. "He is the grandfather of Damien and Dennis." The world seemed to freeze around Juliet. She felt her knees weaken, but remained standing by pure willpower. "Mr. Mason has been looking for his grandchildren for years," the priest continued. "His daughter, after giving birth to the twins, suffered a great emotional shock with the death of her husband. Disoriented, she fled with the babies, travelling through several cities until she stopped here and abandoned them. Mr. Mason managed to find them only now, after years of searching with detectives." The man looked at Juliet with eyes that mixed pain and gratitude. "You have no idea what you have done," he said, his deep voice breaking slightly. "I learned of the love with which you raised my grandchildren. I will never be able to repay you." He explained that his daughter never fully recovered. She had passed away a year ago, still mentally disoriented, never revealing where she had left the children. "I have all the documents," he said, showing a folder he carried with him. "Birth certificates. They are my grandchildren." Juliet felt as if each word was a blade in her heart. She knew, always knew, that this day might come, but not like this, not so suddenly. The boys, sensing something strange, approached cautiously. "Mama Julie," called Dennis, holding her hand. "Who is this man?" How to explain? How to tell these children that their world was about to turn upside down? With a trembling voice, Juliet introduced Mr. Mason as their grandfather. The boys looked confused. They had never heard of a grandfather before. Mr. Mason knelt down to be at the boy's eye level. There were tears in his eyes. "You are so much like your mother," he murmured. In the days that followed, Juliet helped the boys pack their small bags. Each piece of clothing folded was a part of her heart being torn away. Each toy stored was a precious memory she feared losing. Mr. Mason had stayed at the only inn in town. He was a polite, patient man who clearly loved his grandchildren even without knowing them. He took them on outings, told stories about their mother, and showed photographs of a large house in a distant city where they would live. Damien and Dennis were confused, frightened. They clung to Juliet at night, crying. "I don't want to go, Mama Julie," sobbed Dennis. "Please don't let us go." "Let's run away," proposed Damien, his blue eyes determined. "We can hide in the forest." Juliet hugged them tightly, swallowing her own tears. "Your grandfather loves you very much," she said, although each word tore at her. "And he is your real family." "You are our real family," protested the boys. On the morning of the departure, Juliet couldn't get out of bed. She felt as if every bone in her body was broken. She heard the knocks on the door, the voices of Mr. Mason and the boys, but she couldn't respond. Finally, summoning all her strength, she got up and went to the door. The twins immediately ran into her arms, crying. Mr. Mason waited patiently beside the car. "Be good boys," Juliet whispered, kissing them. "Obey your grandfather. Study hard, and remember that I—" "We love you, Mama Julie," shouted Damien, clinging to her. "Very, very much," added Dennis. With a broken heart, Juliet watched the car drive away. She returned to her empty house, sat in the rocking chair where she had often rocked the babies to sleep, and finally allowed herself to cry, a deep, painful cry that seemed endless. The days that followed were a blur of pain. Juliet moved like an automaton. She cleaned the chapel, helped wherever she could, but her eyes were empty. At night she would hug the boys' blue blankets, smelling their scent that was gradually fading away. The people of the town tried to console her, bringing food, offering companionship, but nothing filled the void. 2 weeks after the boys' departure, Juliet was in the chapel, polishing the pews without really noticing what she was doing when she heard it. Quick footsteps, familiar giggles. Her heart raced. "Mama, Julie! Mama, Julie!" She turned just in time to see 2 little tornadoes running towards her down the chapel's aisles. Damien and Dennis threw themselves into her arms, almost knocking her over. "What? How?" he stammered, embracing them as if he feared they would disappear. "They can't stay away from you," said a deep voice. Mr. Mason was standing at the entrance of the chapel, a slight smile on his weary face. "They cry every night," he continued, approaching. "They hardly eat, don't play. They ask for you constantly." Juliet hugged the boys tighter, her heart racing. "I bought the old mansion on the corner," Mr. Mason said, surprising her. "I would like to invite you to live with us, Juliet. These boys need you, and I think you need them just as much." "But why?" Juliet asked, astonished. "You hardly know me." Mr. Mason smiled sadly. "I know enough. I've seen how they talk about you, the love in their eyes. I've seen the photos Father Thomas showed me, the community's accounts. You gave them what my daughter could not, a home full of love. I can't take that away from them." 3 months later, the old mansion at the corner of the chapel, now completely renovated, was full of life. Damien and Dennis ran through the large garden, chasing butterflies. Juliet, wearing a new dress, called them for dinner. In the spacious dining room, Mr. Mason, now Grandpa Robert to the boys, was telling stories of his youth while Juliet served a homemade meal. The boys laughed, asked questions, their eyes shining with happiness. At night, after putting the twins to bed in their new room, decorated with stars on the ceiling, Juliet paused on the balcony to look at the real stars in the sky. "Thank you," she whispered, as she had done so many times. But this time there was no pain in her voice, only gratitude. Juliet's prayer had been answered in ways she never imagined. Her family was unconventional, not bound by blood ties, but it was real. As real as the love that overflowed from her healed heart. And as she entered the house again, where laughter and stories awaited her, Juliet knew that some prayers are answered by the invisible hands of destiny, weaving paths that we don't always understand, but that lead us exactly where we are meant to be. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.